What's going on, collective listeners? We appreciate you guys hopping back on for another episode. Today, we have Joe Gilfedder, who's the head strength and conditioning coach at Fordham University in the Bronx. He talks specifically about the Bronx, the culture, the diversity, and the grit that it brings to him and his staff, and obviously all of the players and the teams that he works with at Fordham. Joe was 28 years old when he took on the head strength and conditioning role there. So obviously he's got a ton of insight to provide there, as well as a ton of good wisdom around, for a 32-year-old, like a ton of good wisdom around just what it takes in terms of like developing your principles, your pillars, how to implement that within a new environment. And the differences in the ways he approaches coaching and connecting with athletes, staying calm in times of stress, all of these things I think are super valuable for everybody, especially young coaches coming up in the game. So appreciate you guys hopping on and listening. So let's get to it. What's going on, collective listeners? Welcome back for another episode. As always, we appreciate you guys tuning in. I'm your host, Anthony Grasso, and we are joined today by Joe Gilfedder, who is the head strength and conditioning coach at Fordham University in the Bronx, New York. If just give you a little background on Joe, he's got his bachelor's degree in kinesiology and exercise science from Ithaca College, master's in kinesiology and exercise science from Springfield College. Some of the places that he's been: American International College, Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, Springfield, obviously Fordham. And for as far as certifications go, he has his CSCS and holds a certification from United States Weightlifting Level 2, and he has his FRCMS Functional Range Conditioning Mobility Specialist. Joe, welcome. Appreciate you hopping on. It was kind of last minute, and you are a very busy man at this particular point in time. But welcome, man. Why don't you introduce yourself? Kind of let everybody know where this whole thing started for you, a little bit of background on yourself, and how it kind of led to where you're at now at Fordham.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of in a nutshell, I was a Division III student athlete, played football. So the way I tried to, maximize my potential in high school and in college was in the weight room, and I absolutely got bit by the iron bug. Would sneak into my high school weight room when it was closed, and I would leave the window open, climb in through the window. Did the same thing in college, make sure you don't tell my coaches or my teachers that, but I would do that. I fell in love with the weight room. I fell in love with strength and conditioning. And once I found out that I could make it a career, I was going to try and match my passion to my career. And I haven't worked a day since.
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, no worry. We're recording, but we'll try to edit that out so that nobody finds out you even sneak in because I'm sure there's some young, eager, potential strength coach that's doing the same thing right now. So we don't want to blow up his spot too. He's probably leaving windows open and leaving them cracked. But
there might be a statute of limitations where the high school and the college can't get me, but I found a way to always make sure that I finished my training. But
yeah.
I kept some of my coaches there a little bit after hours.
Yeah, I would imagine. Well, to be honest with you, that statute of limitations might not be in effect yet. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about today, because obviously we're just talking before we got on the podcast. This guy over here, Joe's getting younger as we go through. So I don't know. It hasn't been all that long, it seems. I mean, you're 32 years old now. You're a head guy at Fordham. Why don't you kind of take us into like what, how Fordham came about, what it led from, right? And some of the experience you've taken into the current role you have now. Because obviously when I first met you, I think you said you're, like I said, 28 years old, taking on a head role at a university such as Fordham, or a college such as Fordham. So yeah, why don't you take us through that?
Yeah, so I was my first job outside of graduate school, first like full-time thing outside of graduate school was working at Dartmouth, and I had the best mentor, friend, leadership underneath Spencer Brown that I could have ever asked for. I would take a bullet for that guy. I'm sure he would take a bullet for me, and he was the greatest person to work under at Dartmouth College. I learned so much from him. I try and talk to him every single week now. And it's one of those guys where you have nothing bad to say about him. It's like, he's too good a father. It's like, his morals are too high.
Yeah.
He's got nothing, you can't say a poor word about him. And I'm so blessed to have landed in that spot and had his mentorship, friendship, and guidance. And I was at Dartmouth for about 3 years, and I just saw the Fordham job posted online, and I applied for it just like anyone else. But I did make sure I reached out. I saw that the athletic director had graduated Springfield. I had, seen that I had some ties to the basketball staff, one of the assistants. So I was doing everything I could to try and get my name in the door, because after 3 years at Dartmouth, I don't know if I was ready. I don't know if we ever know if we're ready, but I knew that I wanted to be a head strength and conditioning coach. There's something about the Bronx, there's something about Fordham that I feel like fits me. It just makes you tougher. I love the kind of grittiness that we have here at Fordham. It's something that I try and feed into. It's something that I feel like makes me a better coach, a better person, and a tougher individual day to day. And I bring this up to a lot of people. I feel like a lot of places can get stale, and a lot of places and people and maybe jobs can get stale for a lot of people. I feel the exact opposite. I feel like I love the Bronx more and more each day. I feel like I love the athletes more and more each day. I feel like I'm developing better relationships with the coaches, the administrators, even just people within the Bronx, walking down to Arthur Ave or walking outside or getting my hair cut at my place that I love going to. I find that I love Fordham more each day that I come to work. And I'm blessed to be able to say that and be in a position where I feel that.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, just to comment on Spencer, I actually interviewed him. He was like the last interview that I did in quarter two. So yeah, and it's so funny because I talked to one of his former players, was also a former player of mine, and I was talking to him the other day. I'm like, man, I just interviewed Spencer on the podcast, and he's like, yeah, man. He's like, I can't wait to listen to that episode. I'm like, no, dude, yeah, like it's awesome. Like he was just awesome. And I'd known Spencer for like a little bit of time. Like he had, asked me to present at one of his conferences, and we had, just had some contact or whatever while I was at UConn. And always like a good dude. But like, there's a lot of people who are like good dudes, but there's like, he's a great dude, right? Like that was kind of, yeah, like it just, and it's funny because, to be honest with you, when you first hopped on the podcast today, I'm looking at sort of like your demeanor and just kind of like the way you present yourself. And I'm like, damn, this dude reminds me a lot of Spencer. Like, I mean, you first like open the Zoom, you kind of get a glimpse of like, you just start like, you're looking for things, right? You're kind of like observing, right? It's just like, man, this guy, like, yeah. So it makes a lot of sense. I saw the Dartmouth thing. I'm like, well, he must have been there under Spencer, and it had to have been, right? You're trying to like match up timelines, but yeah, awesome dude. And what's even cooler is like, you obviously have created a situation where like I know Steve, and I know Steve loves Fordham and he loves working with you. So it's like you have obviously not only, and obviously it takes you being a good individual yourself, but you've taken what Spencer provided for you, and you're like, I want to provide that for everybody else that works with me as well, because I mean, why not, right? Like it was such a great experience, and you've obviously feel strongly about how it shaped the way that you have approached your career today. So that's super cool. And yeah, I guess, long story short, we need a lot more people like Spencer, right, to continue, kind of pushing the field forward. So that's super cool. And to kind of go into the Bronx a little bit, like I think this is an interesting piece. I didn't really plan on going this route with the podcast, but I grew up about, I don't know, like a 40-minute train ride from the Bronx, and, we were big Yankee fans, and we were always down in the Bronx, and there's always something about, when you're traveling in and you see the graffiti on the walls under the bridge and stuff like that. And I'm like, man, this is so much cooler than when I would go to Met games or whatever. And, in Queens or whatever the case, I was like, there's something about the Bronx, something that's a little bit cooler about that. So, and obviously it's been a while for me. I don't live near the Bronx anymore, which is probably why it's taken so long for, Steve and I to be able to get in contact with one another and actually go hang out. But, what is it like? What is it about that place, and how is it kind of different now than, obviously it was, when I was a kid, it was, a little different. Obviously you get your sausage and peppers and stuff right outside the stadium and all that stuff. And there's, no shorter sausage and peppers then or anything like that. But yeah, so talk to me a little about that culture and kind of how that feeds into what's going on at Fordham.
Yeah, it's kind of, I smile as I kind of listen to you talk, because I grew up a Yankee fan. My dad used to bring me to Yankee games when I was younger all the time. And I grew up at the best time to be a Yankee fan. I mean, 1996, when we won the World Championship, we go 98, 99, 2000, the Subway Series against Mets. I could rattle off, all the good memories that I have of being a Yankee fan growing up. I was a Derek Jeter fanatic, and I would practice, going into the hole, jump, throw, to first base, all that type of stuff. So, and the funny thing is my dad grew up in the Bronx. My mom grew up in Brooklyn. And when my dad used to take me to Yankee games growing up, I used to ask him all the time, man, I want to live in the city. Man, I want to live in the city. Man, I like the Bronx. And then it took me till 28 years old to make it happen, to come back to the Bronx, to move here. and to be a part of the Ramley, the Fordham community. So it's kind of poetic in that regards, and it's awesome to be. But to speak about the Bronx, it's so culturally diverse. It's such a artistic and unique place to be that if you go out on Fordham Road, the main road right off campus, I like to say that it's one of the craziest streets to ever be on, and I mean that in a good way. I mean, you have everything at your disposal. If you want to hop on a train ride to Manhattan, if you'd like to, you could get there within 15 to 25 minutes. You could go up to Connecticut very quick. You've got all different types of restaurants and vendors and shops and different types of people. Some of the best people I've ever met in my life are right here in the Bronx, not only within campus, but just right off campus. And I kind of go back to that grittiness, whether you look at, just being in a more urban area or graffiti on the wall or the type of toughness that you need to have in order to flourish here, and I think it builds that, and I tell this to our athletes all the time, and we get, student athletes from everywhere, California, Texas, Florida, up north, down south. And I tell them, I say, hey, the Bronx is a different animal. This is not Manhattan. This is not Brooklyn. It's certainly not Queens. And it's certainly not Kansas. Okay. And it's certainly not New Hampshire, where I was for 3 years. And I'd be lying if I said that it didn't take me a little bit getting used to. But once I got down here, it became something, like I said, I love it more day in and day out. And I think it makes me a tougher individual. I think it makes us a tougher team. And there's just so many good things, sporting wise, culture wise, food wise. If you go down Arthur Ave, man, it is the best Italian food you've ever had in your life. I was just the best butcher shop I've ever been into in my life is down there. I love it. My parents don't know. I'm older too. I'm 32. I don't need a Christmas present or a birthday present, but they always insist on getting me something, and it's always a gift card to my favorite butcher shop down there. Vince's Meat Market, the best cannoli you'll ever have in your life. Marone's Bakery down there. It's such a unique place to be. And once you do come back to the Bronx, man, we'll go get a cannoli.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking forward to that. There's no shortage of Italian pastries that need to go through down my gullet. I'll put it there. It's like the one. It's funny because like we're not known for like the desserts per se, you know what I mean? Right? It's usually more like the pastas and all that kind of stuff. But the like cannolis and sfogliatelle and sfogliatelle, like those three things. Like when I swear to God, like I know like they probably put some like COVID censorship on this, but like when I had COVID, when I ate some sfogliatelle, we had some like a local spot here. I was like, you know what? I'm feeling better. I think I'm feeling pretty good. You know what I mean? It kicks right in.
Man, and it's fun. I don't eat that stuff often. And it's like when I do eat it, I make the joke, like, I can't let any of the athletes see me eat this cannoli, man. Oh my God. Some of the places on Arthur Ave are so good, man. And it's a stone's throw away.
Yeah. Luckily for you guys have access to that, and it could be dangerous too. But obviously, someone like yourself, I'm sure you have enough discipline to kind of keep it at bay, right, and like kind of keep things in check.
Yeah.
So kind of moving from that, right, like now you're in this role, and you talk about some of the value that the Bronx has brought, whether it's brought out of you and some of the people that you work with. What was it like taking on the role that you took on as a head strength and conditioning coach at Fordham, specifically when it comes to kind of like building out a structure of like philosophies and pillars and principles that you really wanted to instill, right? Because I would imagine you get something that you feel like is your own and something that you can build from the ground up. What's more exciting than that, right? It's kind of like outfitting your home gym. It's like, oh, I'm going to do this. And I've been thinking about doing this for so long, and now I have the opportunity to do so. So why don't you kind of talk us through what was going through your mind in those initial stages of I'm 28 and I'm taking on a head role?
I think you kind of hit on the word that I would describe it is, okay, you have your principles and you have your pillars. What do you believe in as far as creating the best strength and conditioning program in the country? Because that is our standard. I don't care if we're talking professional, Division I, FCS, FBS, Division III, NAIA, high school. It doesn't matter. Like, our goal is to be the best strength and conditioning program in the country, regardless of level. So you have your principles. And what you want to do is you want to focus on mastering the basics. I think those masters aren't doing things super complicated, but they're able to master the things that are true needle movers, and they focus on one thing at a time. I'm not going to come in and all of a sudden focus on 85 different pieces of technology or monitoring or this little minutia detail. I wanted to focus on day one, week one. How do we squat? Like not the weight on the bar, but the quality of movement. Okay. And I want to make sure that we are doing the perfect squat. We are maximizing our range of motion. We are perfecting our form. We have great intent on every single rep. Let me focus on that as opposed to the 1 million other things that can come across our table in regards to strength and conditioning. Relationships, right? Needed to make sure that we built great relationships. They don't know, the coaches don't know me, the players don't know me, the administrators don't know me. So I need to make sure that I get in front of all these people, and I need to make sure that they can trust me to run the department the way it needs to be. So I wanted to just focus on those small principles, right? The quality in which we do things in the weight room needs to be the best in the country. And I need to build the strongest relationships with everybody, from our athletic director to the guy across campus, who's maybe charged with cleaning a bathroom. No one is too big, no one is too small. Everyone plays such a critical role into how this operation runs. We've got some of the best interns in the country because we've been able to develop our internship program with Coach Giorgio. Those guys are full-time coaches to me. I try and treat them like full-time coaches. I want their feedback like full-time coaches because I want them to coach like full-time coaches. So the relationship building and the quality in which we do everything, those have really been the two pillars that I've tried to focus on since day one. And it's still a work in progress, because we'll have turnover. We'll have changes within our staff. We'll have changes within the athletic administration, as well as with our sport coaches, our sports medicine team. There's always going to be changes. So it's always going to be a battle to make new relationships, as well as develop ones over, the time I'm lucky enough to be here. So those are kind of some of the things that I really, really focus on. And once I can kind of get a hold on those things, that's when I'll start branching out. Okay, let's try and do something different nutritionally, with our fueling station. Let's try and work with the dining hall to make sure that we've got great options for our student athletes. Let's try and make sure that we hold some events outside of just our normal strength and conditioning time, where we do a student athlete based yoga, where we do a cooking class, where we maybe dabble into some of our velocity based technologies. I don't want to get to any of that calculus before I've mastered addition, subtraction. And I shouldn't even say the word mastered, because I'm still trying to maximize how we do things. But once we kind of have a handle on the basics, then am I going to try and move on to something a little bit more complex?
Yeah. I think kind of as I'm listening to you speak, it kind of brings about a little, I don't know if you want to call it a phrase or whatever, but it's one I always come back to. I don't know if Jocko Willink coined the phrase, or if it's just something that he's the one I heard it from, but prioritize and execute, right? Like whenever I feel like I'm looking around the room, head spinning, I've got a to-do list that's, this long or whatever the case may be. I'm like, okay, what's the most important thing and the most impactful thing that you can do right now, and just go do that. And then I will get the ball rolling. And then you kind of get yourself in a position where you can start to make decisions from there. And it seems like that's kind of the approach, right? Not to reduce it down to something as simple as that, but that's kind of the approach you took, right? It's like, I want to figure out what the most important and impactful things that I can do right now for my athletes are, and the coaches and the sport coaches, strength coaches, and everybody involved in sports medicine, I can do for them. And then, then we could take a look at, once we've mastered those things, or like you said, at least got in the process of understanding how you want to approach the mastery of those things, then we can move on and go forward from there. So I guess my next question would be, how has that gone? And how was that starting off, right? Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I may be wrong in this, but the way you approach establishing these relationships with people who work in sports medicine and your sport coaches may have been different than the way you approach the relationship that you're establishing with your players and with your strength coaches and the people that are working underneath it, your interns. Or maybe they aren't. Maybe you have these pillars and these principles. Like, I'm going to approach developing relationships with the same way with every single person. I'm not really sure. Like, why don't you kind of open us up to your lens when it comes to that stuff? And then how has that gone? Like, did you come across some adversity, some obstacles in that process?
Definitely. So definitely a question which can it can be a loaded question, right? But one
Yeah.
thing that I've tried to do, and it's funny you bring up Jocko Willink, because one of his books that I've read a couple times now is Extreme Ownership.
Mm.
And sometimes, well, in building any type of relationship, you got to build trust. So, in order for me to get these individuals from all areas of our athletic department to trust me, I've needed to have excellent lines of communication, even when they might not even ask for that communication. So, being able to tell our athletic director what we're working on, he didn't even ask me. Okay, but I made sure that I told him, hey, we're working on X, Y, and Z. Football's doing great. Hey, swimming and diving is an excellent team. I'm seeing a little bit struggling with X team, but we're going to work on it.
Mm.
So now that individual knows, okay, Gil's on it. Gil is on top of his stuff. Same thing with sports medicine. I'm going to them even when they don't even ask for something. Are we developing great lines of communication? Not just text messages or emails, but am I getting over there? Am I creating a daily Google sheet that updated daily? So I know exactly the treatment that guy is getting. They know exactly the type of training that they're getting. Hey, I just, I'm looking at the temperature. Let me go over there and just talk to athletic trainers about the temperature. What's it going to be like on the turf? I saw that on Friday when we're supposed to be out there, it might be raining. Over communication and telling people, what you're working on, and what you want to build, and where your kind of mind and vision is going. I think in regards to strength and conditioning, it's an invaluable tool to develop those trusting relationships.
Yeah.
And Jocko used to say it in regards to bosses that used to be overbearing. And I'm lucky enough that I don't have overbearing bosses either with the coaches or administration, but I always want to make sure that they know that I can be trusted, that I'm always going to try and develop the program. I'm always going to try and do what's best for the student athletes as well as my coworkers overall. And sometimes that just takes me, letting them know that what we're working on. And I think it's a good tool to have in the arsenal.
Yeah, absolutely. I really want to emphasize that. I mean, obviously communication has so many different facets, right? But and I think a lot of people who get into positions like the one that you're in right now, it's like, okay, I'm going to communicate to my strength coaches. I'm going to communicate to the sports medicine staff. I'm going to try to create some synergy between ourselves and the sport coaches, whatever the case may be. But for you to go out of your way to send a message or go to, your athletic director or anybody administration, your support staff, and say, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's, my interpretation of the pulse of every single team I'm working with. You could probably give, the same, if he or she really wanted, that you could probably give him an interpretation of the pulse of every single athlete that you guys are working with, right? Like there's that level of knowledge and care towards the craft, and you're just giving yourself an opportunity to articulate that to the guy who, obviously wants to know that the department's in good hands. And I'm sure that, he or she feels that, right, whenever you do go speak to them. So I think, and that's interesting. So anybody listening, right? Like if that's not something that you've done before, I think that's something extremely valuable. I think there's probably been some situation, and if you haven't done it before, or maybe there's been situations where you feel like, man, that would have been really good for me to do in that situation. That might have changed the course of things a little bit, right? That might have kind of, give maybe, allowed them to view our department through a different lens, or give them a little more insight, or get them more involved in what we have going on here, create more value for myself, whatever the case may be. So I really wanted to emphasize that. I appreciate that insight. I think that that's something that anybody could do, just over communicate, right? And give yourself an opportunity. So, and so, obviously, we talk like motivation, we talk discipline, we talk, all of these concepts, right? But what are some of those pillars that you feel like you had to like personally hang your hat on for you as an individual, where it's like, all right, the reality is, as much, support you have, you're the only person in that title, in that role right now, right? Like you're the guy, right? And so people are looking. And so what were kind of some of the things that you decided to fall back on in terms of like your own personal motivation, the things that drove you? Was it something along, well, I'll let you kind of answer it, but it could be many facets, right? It could be, I want to prove people right. I want to prove people wrong. I want to, sort of, stick my neck out there for the people who invested in me. What were the things that kind of kept you going along this process through those obstacles?
To be honest with you, I'm motivated a lot by the people around me a lot. Coach Giorgio, Coach Greer, our interns motivate the hell out of me because they are so motivated and I'm so inspired. And I'm like, man, we've got some hungry young interns that have aspirations to be in the NFL, to be at Power Five schools. And then I see how much they're reading and they're developing and how hard they're working and how hungry they are. And then I'm like, if I'm the head guy and I'm not beating them, I should just give them the head role. So, they motivate the hell out of me. And it's healthy competition, and this is how I felt at Springfield College in my graduate work. I never felt comfortable with the pace in which things were moving. I was always jealous of the person that read a book that I didn't read. I was always jealous if somebody beat me to the weight room or was there a little bit later. I had like this FOMO that I was missing out on Cal Dietz triphasic training if that person was a chapter above me or something like that. And I still have that to this day, where I keep buying books faster than I can read them. So it's like my library gets bigger and bigger, and it's like I can't read that fast. It's I'm very inspired by the people who I'm able to work with, have worked with. So being able to not only be motivated by them, but they support the overall program so much. I'm lucky enough with football that I have some assistants and interns that work with me because not every team is like that. When I train some other teams, I don't have that many assistants. But when it comes to football, when it comes to the operation of our strength and conditioning department overall, I'm so lucky to have so many people to lean on, ask for feedback. What did you see? What do you think about this nutritional approach that we want to take with the athletes? Or what do you think about organizing, our freshman developmental program this way? All those struggles that come up, even to something as, small as like, how do we want to organize the back closet so we can get to the mini hurdles easily? I'm trying to throw ideas off these guys. And I don't know if you could tell, but I've got a very small office, right? And I share it with our interns. I share it with our assistants. So a lot of times I'm just like, hey, what do you think about this? I'm able to very easily bounce ideas off of and find the best possible solution. So between the people I'm working with, I get a ton of motivation. I'm able to get plenty of points of view as to best, serve our strength and conditioning department. And to be honest with you, I like referring to everyone in here as a head strength and conditioning coach. I know I get the title at Fordham, and my name's at the top of the department in regards to that, but I'm not the head strength and conditioning coach for women's basketball. We're men's basketball, we're volleyball, we're women's soccer, they're the head strength and conditioning coach. So I try to treat them as such as well.
Yeah, I think what's interesting there too is you probably not to keep referencing Jocko, but he talks about decentralized command in the book, right? And he talks about like the idea of having some sort of philosophy, and then everybody underneath you can kind of echo that, and you can trust them to make the decisions. Because you're not always going to be around to help them make those decisions for you. But I bet you by asking questions, I didn't really think about this, but I'm just thinking about it now. Like by you being in the same office as them and you asking them questions, that automatically increases the level of communication and just the awareness and the wherewithal, like everybody knowing what's going on, everyone's on the same page kind of thing, because they understand where you're coming from by asking those questions, right? And they can probably kind of, formulate the answers, right? And be like, okay, well, there's a reason he asked me about this. He obviously cares about this. Here's the answer we gave, or I gave, and here's what we decided on. And here's how I'm going to go about approaching these situations, when in the future, when they do come, whether it's something as simple as organizing the back closet so you can get to the hurdles, or whether it's something a little bit larger in terms of like return to play stuff, whatever the case may be, all very good and very interesting and valuable stuff. And, obviously you're in a situation, like you said, it's like you want to treat them like they are the head strength coaches. Has obviously you've been with Spencer, and that's you're in, probably he probably treated you the same way, right? And that's probably why you're allowed to and feel confident in your ability to do so. What would you say are some of like the bigger mistakes? If you, I know, like, you're 32, so I don't mean to talk to you like you're super old, you know what I mean? But it's like, we're both the same age. I'm going to be 32 in October. So it's like, but like, if you could really look back, like, have things changed a lot since your early 20s? Like the way you coach, how you coach, some of the situations that you've approached in your early 20s versus where you're at now? Like, what are some of like the more like mistake driven situations that you've been involved in that you can kind of impress upon some of the listeners, and how that's changed into some successes that you've had now?
I've definitely changed the style in which I've coached. I won't say a lot, but I used to get like fired up about everything. You know, I and I think that's kind of just trying to find your way as a coach. You have certain people that you look up to, particularly when you're involved maybe with football a lot. You get some strength coaches who it's like they've only got one volume and it's just yelling nonstop. And me just trying to find my way, I think I was kind of enamored with that yelling, that intensity, and trying to be like this tough, hard-nosed coach. And over the years, I've tried to not just be this tough, hard-nosed coach through yelling at athletes, or wearing this mean mug all the time or anything like that, but I want to be a tough, hard-nosed coach because they know the standards are high and that I expect a lot of them. And I expect discipline, and I expect it to be done right, and I expect it to be done right consistently. And I'm going to have high standards for every single team that I coach, whether it's football or my other responsibilities with swim and dive, water polo, and cheer and dance team. My cheer and dancers, the standard in which we execute our training sessions is exactly the same as the NFL drafted players that we've had inside of our football program. Same exact standard. Now, the method in which I coach them, maybe my attitude or my demeanor is somewhat different, because as well as I do, sometimes you give these football players an inch, they take a mile. Right? So maybe I do need to be a little bit tougher with them, whereas I can not bend the rules per se, but my demeanor and the way in which I teach that 100-pound flyer on the cheer team is slightly different than our 300-pound offensive lineman. And
Sure.
I'll tell you what, sometimes that 100-pound flyer is a little bit tougher than that 300-pound lineman.
I was going to say, I'm like, well, which one is which? Sometimes.
But I love working with cheer and dance. I went to their practice. They are so unbelievably strong and tough. Unbelievable, man. Like, I was blown away about their toughness. Like, you're talking about, people falling from 8, 9, 10 feet. And then it's like, hey, go get back up there.
Yeah.
Like, just drop me. Are you kidding me? I'm not getting back up there. But they are so damn tough. They come in with all these bruises and stuff. But they train so hard, and they're so thankful for the coaching, no egos, and they understand how important strength is, not only to their performance, but also to staying healthy overall. I know I kind of went off on my little cheer dance tangent right there, but to get back to your original question, as far as how I've evolved, is I've definitely been able to think a little bit more clearly. And I think I've been able to get respect from coaches, sports administrators, sports medicine, and athletes because of the discipline and the high standard in which we run our program, and that I'm going to hold them to, as opposed to me just maybe yelling or being that juice guy all the time. Now, there are times when, I will yell, and there are times when I've got more juice than anybody else in the room. But there are also going to be times where I'm going to be more reserved, and I need to explain things more calmly, and I need to approach certain kids differently, because if I start yelling at one kid, I might lose him for a day, a week, a month, a year, maybe his whole career. Maybe he will never react the same way. So I have to be incredibly socially intelligent about how I coach each individual, because ultimately, I just want to get them. My only goal as a coach really is I want to see you do something you've never done before, and that could be a cheerleader doing her first chin up. or it could be a 405-pound clean. You know, I have the same exact joy on both of those things. When an athlete is able to do something they've never done before in their life, that's my greatest joy as a coach. And I need to make sure that I approach that athlete and talk to them the way in which will facilitate that growth.
Yeah.
And it's everybody. You know, some people I can yell at and I can get these wide eyes like this and I can start getting after them. That doesn't work for everybody. Mm-hmm. Some people need to approach, put my arm around them and be like, hey, you know, I know it's early. I know you had a rough night. I know you got a test coming up, man. But if we can get a great set right here, right, we're going to move that needle forward. And if we can move the needle forward today, we can do the same thing tomorrow. And we can stack these wins day after day after day. And eventually that end goal is going to come. So sometimes it takes that yelling for some athletes and they love it. Other kids, I would lose them. And that's the last thing I want to do is lose a kid for one day, let alone longer than that.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. It's kind of, you know, I don't know if it strikes the same amount of fear in myself as it did in a bunch of the other, or, you know, it struck the same amount of fear in the listeners as it struck to myself. But when you talk about potentially losing an athlete for the rest of their career because of one mistake, and you know, it's funny because I actually think about that pretty often now, especially being, you know, at my age, like 31, you really start to think about things from like a family perspective. You're like, man, like I really, really got to be conscious and socially aware of like the things that I say to my brothers or my mom or my dad or, you know, family members. Maybe something in the moment that you don't really think too much of could change. And it's sad. And I'm not, you know, that's the reasons for these things and why they take place and why they happen are, you know, I'm probably a little bit beyond this podcast right now, at least for this particular, that's probably its own podcast. But the reality is, like, you could say something that could really change the perspective and some things that, you know, someone may never forget. Right. And even if it's not something that all that bad, the way they interpret it. So I think it's incredible that you've decided like, hey, I need to be that socially aware. I need to be that emotionally intelligent to what I'm going to say, when I'm going to say it, and how I'm going to deliver it. And I don't think that that's a testament to, or has anything to do with, you know, what a lot of people talk about nowadays, like, oh, like this generation is super soft. You have to be so sensitive about like what is said and all that stuff. I think that's different. I think what you're talking about is just being responsible with your words and understanding the impact that they can have. It's not to say that, you know, you're going to sit there and try to like, you know, beat around the bush with certain athletes and not speak to them directly. You said you're holding them to a certain standard. You're going to speak to them directly. And that's probably why they have so much trust in you, why they respect you, is because you keep it real with them. Right. So I think, you know, I think it's different to say like, I do agree. I think, you know, everybody who's like, you know, super sensitive about certain things or whatever, it's like, listen, we can be fine with that. But like what we're talking about here is just like being responsible with the way that you're trying to reach and connect with everybody. And I think that takes pure fortitude. I think that takes a lot of strength and you know, mental resilience to be able to do something like that, because you're talking about dealing with, I mean, what's the number of athletes, right? Like it varies, but it's a lot, right? It's a ton of athletes at different times. So, yeah. Do you have any, before I move on to our next question, do you have anything that you wanted to kind of dive into on that?
I 100% agree with you. And to sum it up, it's just leaders need to be in control of their emotions. They need to be disciplined. And if I'm just flying off the handle because, you know, a 17, 18-year-old, you know, was not doing something correctly or messing around or anything, it's like, then I'm no better than that immature 17, 18-year-old. You know, I need to be in control of my emotions, my actions, because ultimately, I'm the leader in the room. So if I'm out of control, how can I expect them to be in control, or my staff, the interns, or anybody? You know, I think some of that control is something that I lacked maybe in my early coaching career. Whereas I'm, like you said, I'm kind of at a time, at least in my coaching career or life or age, in which that's at the forefront of my mind, that I need to make sure that I do the right thing all the time, because the athletes are always watching. And I want to be a good leader for them. I want to be the standard. I hold them to a high standard, but if I don't live that standard, then I'm just talking about it.
And I think that's, you know, what I kind of want to go into next. And that leads me to my next question is really, you talk about being the standard, and you talk about, you know, what you put on display, how they view you. And, you know, I think there's so much value, and like it almost became like when I first started to make that transition from, like you said, like earlier on in your career, it's like, yeah, maybe you had a little bit more of a jump or a quick response to certain things, right? And now it's like I understand the value of being able to take a step back, really be composed, deliver something and a message to them that's going to have a longer lasting impact in a positive sense, right? And I found when I first like started to hear these concepts, right, like whatever age it was, you're kind of like, this could be fun. I'm going to approach my whole day today and I'm going to see how I can respond to every single situation that happens to me with the most level-headed, calm, composed sort of like, staying in a in a peaceful state of mind, regardless of the duress that I'm being placed under. And I think that, there's a ton of different like techniques and different ways to kind of go about doing that. But just for the purposes of this podcast, it's like, we're talking about coaching, right? You're talking about communicating, you're talking about reaching human beings. So you have that part of you, right? Where it's like, you're trying to put that on display and show the standard, right? What is, I mean, and obviously like, if you wouldn't mind, like, what does the personal life of Joe look like, right? Because it's like, I mean, you have family, right? You have people that depend on you that are not athletes, right? Like you have other people in your life, you have a personal life, right? Like, how has that kind of evolved? How does your take on that evolved as being a strength coach? How has it maybe changed for the better or for worse after taking on a head role? Some of the advice that you can provide and some of the insight you can impart on some of the listeners who are, flat out struggling with the work-life balance of what it takes to be a strength coach and also be a good family member.
I think that's something I really struggled with early on in my career. And I think a lot of strength coaches struggle in the beginning just because of the nature of strength and conditioning coaching, particularly at the collegiate level, which is the level I'm most familiar with. But one thing I try and remind myself and to remind my staff is you have to keep your bucket full because you can't draw from an empty bucket. And I know when I don't do things personally to keep my bucket full, I'm not as good a coach, I'm not as good a coworker, and I'm just not happy overall. So there's some things that I've done where I make sure that I include every single day and or week to make sure that I keep my bucket full. And each one of my staff members, I say this all the time, and we've each got like different things in our lives that are able to keep our bucket full. So for example, for me, and some of this, might be, like, whatever, but things that really allow me to be happy and give the best of myself to my job, to my athletes, to my coworkers is I'm a huge reader. I love to read in the morning, before I really do anything. I'll have a cup of coffee and I'll read anything. It could be one page, it could be 50 pages. And we do a lot of continuing education as a staff, but I'll also read things personally. And I try and change up the genre. It's not just always nonfiction, leadership books or Tudor Bompas, periodization. I'll read True Grit that my dad just gifted me, which is a mystery novel. I'll read some different things in regards to kind of keep my bucket full, and it doesn't have to just be science and practice of strength training. So I always make sure that I read something every day. Very similar to Giorgio, who has gotten into jiu-jitsu, I've gotten into Muay Thai, which is a form of kickboxing from Thailand. And that has been a life-changing pursuit for me. That has grounded me. It has humbled me. It has brought me back to moving athletically, because after college football, you kind of lose that competition. You lose that athletic movement. Because then you just start maybe lifting every day and you don't do as much jumping or running or twisting or bending or, getting knocked down or punched yourself, which I think is important. It keeps me humble,
Yeah.
And you see some people in the gym who would look nothing like, this guy, I ain't afraid of this guy. I'm a big, bad football player, man. When they kick you in the leg, that's for real.
Yeah.
So it's very humbling, and it's something that has added so much to my life as far as the martial arts kind of mindset, that I would recommend everybody do something in that regards to some level, because it has been life changing in the best way possible, and it's fun because I do some of the striking based things. Giorgio does the ground based things. So people will say like, oh, who would take each other in a fight? And it's like, listen, I don't want any part of Giorgio on the ground, but I don't know if he wants any part of me standing up. So we're just going to agree to, be friends.
Yeah, I think Giorgio would just try to pull guard pretty early, get to his butt, and just sort of scoot. Hey, I don't know if you've seen any of those videos, but it's so funny when you get like a guy from like the different disciplines, what I mean, the different disciplines of martial arts. Like, all right, well, jiu-jitsu guy could try to pull guard. He's going to sit down. And he's going to just try to scoot his butt forward. And the Muay Thai guy is going to be up, stand up strong. He's got the judo guy is going to be trying to figure out what he can, grab onto to throw and all that stuff. But no, that's funny, man. That's good stuff. I agree. I think you said it perfectly. The martial arts mindset. I think that was like one of the things that I gravitated towards. I was just like, at the very least, like, I just want to be able to stay calm in times of immediate stress when someone's like you said, kicking you or punching you in the face. Like you said, it keeps you humble. It keeps you in check. It also provides you with a sense of like, this is going to sound nuts, but like it provides you with like a sense of a peace of mind where it's like, wow, last week when I was getting choked in this position, I was freaking out. And now I'm actually able to kind of like stop, think about what would make the most sense in order to try to escape this position. Or maybe I just need to tap and get out of this thing. But whatever the case is, I think that's awesome. I think that's an incredible message for you to send for sure.
It's fun to get coached again too. Like as an athlete, dude, my whole life, like you miss being coached. And it's like, I'm a beginner again, and it's like the rate of change that you can make and progress. Maybe it's not as quick as maybe when you were 8 years old. The mind's not going to adapt as quickly at 32 as it once did. But being able to get coached on technique, on toughness, it's made me a better coach too. Yeah. And when I'm a better coach on the floor, I'm happier as well. That fills my bucket. But if I'm not a good coach, I'm doing a disservice to these athletes. Yeah. It's a great part of it as well.
Yeah. But, I meant to mention that that is like the one thing I didn't expect getting involved. I didn't even think about that. I thought about all the things like, okay, I want to learn how to defend myself, stay calm in times of stress. I want to be able to be a part of a community again, right? Like I work from home now. So like having the social aspect of that definitely helps. I was like, I just think it's in general, right? Like it's good to be involved in something where you're competitive, you're moving, understanding movement quality, all that stuff. But I didn't expect like 2 or 3 weeks in, I'm like, damn, dude, like it feels incredibly I haven't been coached in something since I was like 20 years old. And if you're right, it completely changed things. I'm like, wow, this is awesome. Like I have things that I'm working towards. Like I have some sort of like structure as far as like what I want to achieve, how I want to achieve it. Someone's trying to progress me. I have to figure out like what they're trying to communicate to me. And like you said, it makes you a better coach. So, I appreciate you mentioning that. That is one thing I did not expect to get into when I first started. I was like, man, I like being coached again. It's been so long.
And I'm a beginner. I mean, I've been doing it for, maybe like a year and a half, 2 years now. But it's like, if I get frustrated with an athlete who's only been lifting for 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, it's like, then I take a step back and be like, I'm kind of in that same realm with Muay Thai and I mess up all the time. I do things wrong all the time. Like, I should not get so frustrated with an athlete who just makes an honest mistake because I make plenty of mistakes, It makes me empathetic as a coach because I'm getting coached regularly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was gonna say, I was like, if my instructor didn't have any patience with me, oh man, the amount of times like, put your right leg here, and like, that's your left arm. Like, okay, my bad. Yeah, that's not your right leg. So yeah, no, it's a great point, right? Creating a little bit more of an understanding, being sympathetic towards someone who's trying to learn a new skill, something that they haven't done for most of their life, most of their life, right? So yeah, I just, we're kind of, I've been trying to keep these like 45 minutes to an hour, but I mean, this is a great conversation. I really appreciate it. I also know that you have, other things that you need to take care of, but I do, if you wouldn't mind kind of just, I guess you can kind of leave the floor with some if you want to impart any sort of wisdom or any last words to the listeners, and also let people know where they can find you on like social media and all that kind of stuff. But if you have any like final thoughts and you can take the rest of the time, just to kind of go through and anything that you really wanted to get out there, any information that you really wanted to get out there today, now is your time.
It's kind of a weird position to be in because I don't know if I have much wisdom or things like that. But, I appreciate you having me on. Hopefully somebody took something away from our conversation here, one little thing. But, I'm just very, very fortunate to be in the position I'm in, and one thing that I try and impart on all our athletes, because our school is such a high academic school, business, econ, poli sci, we get people in majors that are just so out of my different than my interest level. A lot of things that I'll ask them is, do you enjoy it? Do you love it? And sometimes they'll say yes. And sometimes they'll say, no, I just, I want to make a lot of money. And I always kind of talk to them. I'm like, well, that's nice, but I want you to make sure that you find something that you love doing, and I'm lucky enough to love strength and conditioning. I just want our athletes to love coming to our strength and conditioning center. I want them to pursue majors and careers that they love doing. And I want everyone who might listen to this to just do something that they love, do something to where they feel like they're growing, number one, and then two, they're giving as well. And I think we're lucky as coaches to be able to do that. I don't know what it's like to make $1 million, but I think the best feeling in the world is knowing that I got better, that day in anything. Like when I'm able to just write in my notebook, like things that I learned, or progression in my own training, or feeling like I'm growing as a coach because look at the progress we're making as a team, collectively, or even just numerically with some of our, key performance indicators. That gives me more satisfaction than anything. So I guess my wisdom, that I would share is just, do something where you feel like you can grow and you can give, because that's, to me, the most important thing.
That's awesome. Thank you, Joe. We appreciate having you on, man. And thank you for hopping on, and we wish you guys the best of luck. So we'll wrap it up here. But again, thank you. Thank you all listeners for listening as always. And Joe, we'll catch you soon.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. I had a blast.
All right. Absolutely. Have a good one.